I think what's different now is looking at a shift of what happened to what's next. How do I look at this data and say there could be a recognition of what's happened, but what I'm really trying to do is saying, based on this data, what's next for us?
Welcome to the Net Assets Podcast, the official podcast from MBOA Business Leadership for Independent Schools, where we explore the people, strategies, and ideas shaping the future of independent school business leadership. This episode of the Net Assets Podcast is provided with the generous support of Facts. I'm your host, Jeff Shields, MBOA President and CEO. And if you're not familiar with MBOA, we're the only national association focused exclusively on business and operations professionals in pre-K through 12 independent schools. We empower our members with knowledge, community, and tools to lead their schools with confidence and clarity. Today, I am very delighted to be joined by Anne-Marie Tidona, Director of Finance, Operations, and Strategic Projects at Friends Academy, a K through 12 day school in Locust Valley, New York, serving approximately 750 students. Anne-Marie has been part of Friends Academy for 28 years. She's also the 2026 recipient of MBOA's Ken White Distinguished Business Officer Award, our highest honor that recognizes her leadership and dedication to the independent school community. In addition, I had the privilege of working with her as a member of the MBOA Board of Directors for 6 wonderful years, including a term as board treasurer. Anne-Marie, at long last, welcome to the Net Assets Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm really excited and honored to be here and to have an opportunity to connect and to speak with you.
That's great, and I appreciate it very much. Before we get in really to the meat of what you've been up to lately, I'm so impressed after a tenure like yours, you continue to be busy. And I understand you recently completed a school database transition, which I imagine consumed a good portion of your time. And for anyone who's ever lived through a major systems transition, like MBOA has recently embarked upon, that phrase alone, I think, Anne-Marie, causes PTSD for some. But how did it go, and what did you learn from the process?
Thank you. PTSD is actually a great response. It is a massive undertaking. And we had been with Senior Systems. We had been with them for the as long as I've been at Friends and probably a good 5 years since then. Their times are different and the need to modernize was there. So we did a lot of work and found the system that we thought is best for Friends Academy. And I would say we are maybe 2 to 3 weeks to get over that finish line. I would say it's an opportunity to rethink how you've been doing things. It would have been a much simpler process if we kept like our existing chart of accounts, but we were really trying to be thoughtful about where the school was today. And for me, given how long I've been here and what the horizon looks like, making sure the school was set up well for the future. So the redesign of the chart of accounts and the mapping of all data and getting all historical data in was quite an undertaking. I would also tell you that it's different than any other in the past in the ways in which you work through a migration. Gone are the days of consultants that come in and spend 2 or 3 days with you, helping you set up your system and then training you on it. A lot of it is done through video tutorials. So it's just a very different way of moving through a process. I found it in some ways more time consuming than it would have been just to have a team show up for a week and you dedicate yourself and you come out of the week being pretty well trained and pretty well set up. So that's my experience is that I would say it takes a lot of time. Uh,
Yes, and patience.
yeah.
And MBOA has just been through the same thing, and I don't know about you, but I'm 16 years here. I was 10 years at another association. I only worked on that database, and I thought, "Wow, what a great idea. Let's reinvent everything and transition." But for exactly the same reason, it's times have changed. We need different things, and we have to find the right system for this time, and hopefully for well into the future. Any advice that you can pass along to someone who may be trepidatious about having a big system migration like you just went through, or just good advice for when you go through a change of that magnitude at your school?
I think some of the things we were surprised about as we walked through it was just this in sales, everything sounds great and everything seems to be included and they can do that. And then there was often times where we're getting through where that's, oh, that's an add-on cost if you want to do that. Or so I would just say allow a larger contingency or plan for things that you think are part of the package, but then end up being, oh, but if you have those people, they need to be set up as a user. And then if they're set up a user, there's a charge for that. So those were some of the things that I was surprised by.
A good friend of mine was in software sales, and he would often share conversations he would have with customers, and they would say, "Can it do X, Y, and Z?" And he's like, "Sure, it could do that. It's going to cost you, but sure, it can do anything you want for the right price." I really am impressed at your long tenure. I really think there's so few business officers that, like you, have been at the same school for the lion's share of their career. And that means you've had a front row seat to how independent school finance and operations has really evolved over time. I'm sure you've reflected on now and again on what's changed the most about the type of role that you're in or pre-K through 12 independent schools in general. Any thoughts on that?
I would say that in looking back, the beginning was very much accounting and finance, right? Are your books and records clean? Do you have good reporting to your constituents? The financing aspects is your working capital. Do you have the line of credits and the bond financing? And that was, I would say, would all be the normal roles of a CFO. And I think today it is so much more about forecasting and strategy. So not that those things have gone away, but certainly technology, and again, obviously I've been here a long time. They seem to have they run themselves, spend a lot more time in thinking about what's the right strategy for the school, given the sort of global conditions that we're operating in, and then the local demographic conditions that we're operating in on at Burns Academy. And what do those scenarios look like? So it's a lot of scenario analysis and forecasting and sort of strategy work that I don't think was as prevalent at the beginning of my career.
You started in the golden age, wouldn't you agree? It was really a different time for schools, for students, for money, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Although when I came to Friends, we had less than $2 million of endowment. We had an operating budget that was barely balanced. It's interesting when I talk to current boards or something, they feel like the school has been, except we have a very low, we have over 70 million in endowment now.
Wow.
And thank you. And so they feel like the school has been this successful for always. And I'm like, no, we didn't start this way.
I find myself reminding our staff the same thing. No, it wasn't always like this. And I love that role of archivist, if you will. And I say, because I think it helps you appreciate where we are now, right? There's always going to be challenges, there's always going to be issues, but it is good to have perspective on we've had challenges before and we overcame them and look where we are now, right? And we can do this again. So I think that context is really useful. One thing I love about your title that I've noticed is that it includes strategic projects, which is very unique. And I bet you there's a story behind there somewhere of how that got added to your title. But as you look at your career there, is there a specific project that you're particularly proud of or is emblematic of the contribution that you have made to Friends Academy over time?
I would say the biggest project was the demographic study that I do every 5 years. And it's really interesting to go back and look at ones that I did early on to see if they actually proved out to be true. And they have, which is again is encouraging because it takes a lot of time and energy to do it. But then to see that it really did help us make strategy decisions. It was forecasting and giving us predictors that were really important to know at the time and in fact actually did play out to be most times right on.
That's incredible. And that must be really satisfying because I've seen presentations where you've summarized that very comprehensive work that you do, and it really is exciting. Obviously, we're going to get into a lot of your use of data during our brief time together because it was one of the areas that was highlighted when you received the Ken White Award earlier this year. And that's your passion for data and your willingness to share with others how you use data in your work. Where did that passion develop for you?
He probably has no idea, but I saw Scott Looney when he was the director of admissions for the Cranbrook schools. And I honestly do not remember what venue I saw him do this presentation in, but he was doing a presentation on data analysis, analytics, and in specific demographics, and how, as admissions director, he was using the demographics as a tool. And I just was like blown away by his presentation. Then I was like, oh my God, this type of data could be used for all different kinds of predictors. And so I am sure, has no idea that he inspired my love of data or the way in which that I applied it to my work at Friends in areas far outside of finance, whether it's advancement or admissions. Obviously, we've been part of Index, so that's been a great influence as well. But he was really the one that gave me that sort of demographics passion years ago.
And so, Scott, if you're listening, thank you. And now he does know. So I think that's a great thing. I've always described data as kind of this machete that can cut through anecdotal information, perceptions, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think your demographics work is really what's been a highlight of your data? What folks at your school really look to you for, and it's really made the greatest impact? Or is there something else in your use of data that you'd put up there at the same level?
I would say the 5-year demographic study is really sort of ties always in with long range planning, strategic planning, those kinds of things. We've tried to tie it into that. But I also think I do a lot of work, and it sometimes it changes from year to year depending on what's the thing we're looking at, right? But I do a lot of KPI work. I have a school dashboard, which I think the board finds really helpful because it's organized around the key areas of the school and then key metrics in those areas. And I'll do a sort of 5-year look back and then I look forward. And I find that's a tool that people really seem to like as well.
That's interesting, I bet. And I know people say that you can make data say anything you want it to say. Do you subscribe to that thinking?
I think you have to be really careful. I think it's easy in general to fall into confirmation bias, right? To find the data that supports what you're trying to say. So, I mean, you know me, I'm a bit of a contrarian. So I intentionally try to find things that might go against what I was thinking to, because I do think you can fall into that trap, right? You can look at something one way and maybe find a select set of data that supports that. But if you were to broaden your perspective or change the context, would that data still be relevant or still be saying the same thing? So those are the things I try to pay attention to when I'm looking at it, and to check myself. Am I just stopping here because I got the answer I thought it was or I wanted it to be, as opposed to, do I have a comprehensive look at a full data set and know that, yeah, okay, we've looked at these variances. And sometimes it's just pointing it out. Most of the data says this, but there's been this other study that said something different.
That's interesting. And I don't find you as a contrarian as much as I find you really candid and a truth teller. And you will own that truth regardless of where you think the room might be.
Yeah.
And I've always appreciated that. I value data. I know you do. You're passionate about it. Has there been any time you used data and it led you in the wrong direction, or it was a data fail of sorts where you thought, wow, how did that happen? Is there anything that comes to mind in that area for you?
I wouldn't say that necessarily from a data fail. It was more being careful to not data overload. And I'm a person who loves to sit in all of it. And there are people that's just too much for. I don't need to see all of that. I just want to see this. So I've become really cognizant of asking the questions. One, what is the question that we're trying to solve for? And what data helps us answer that question? And if it's interesting data, but it doesn't fit into those two buckets, I might eliminate it or keep it on the side just to make sure that I don't lose sort of the audience in the data because it's too much or over someone's head or they don't have the full context to be able to truly understand it.
Today's episode is brought to you by Fax, a proud member of the MBOA Corporate Circle. As business officers, more than just the budget. How every department from admissions to the classroom to the family experience connects back to the school's financial health. Fax Financial Intelligence brings that whole picture into one connected system. So the decisions you make don't just balance your books, they support every department and every family. It's EdTech built around how the work actually flows. So visit faxmgt.com today. That's faxmgt.com today. I remember being in the audience of a business officer many years ago, and they just became a member of Index. So they were super excited about sharing that data. And it occurred to me, as being a person in the audience, don't tell me everything you know. Tell me everything I need to know. And so I think your comments about be judicious, answer the question, and don't go overboard dazzling people with all of the data, but really try and keep it focused. And I bet you that's a skill you refined over time, right?
Most definitely.
And that sounds like great advice for
Yeah.
business officers as they use data and as they think about data. And in that regard, what advice would you give business officers who want to make their data more useful, not just more impressive looking, but actionable, not just interesting, but actionable?
I think what's different now is to harken back a little to what I said earlier about being less about reporting and more about forecasting and strategy. It's looking at a shift of what happened to what's next. How do I look at this data and say there could be a recognition of what's happened, but what I'm really trying to do is saying, based on this data, what's next for us?
That's very interesting. It goes back to that forecasting, and it helps, I think, also keep your trustees future oriented, which I think is always the goal of their discussions, right?
Yes, and I think that's to some extent also there's presenting the data, and then it's looking at, okay, if we have this data, what kind of strategy comes out of it? So if we hit certain numbers, is there something that triggers an execution of an action? And I've also played around a lot with executive summaries, and I've been using AI to do a lot of different things for different constituents, right? There are people who can take your financial reports and just look at that and they're finance people and they know how to read your audited financials and they can understand your budgets. But on boards, we have a whole complement of people, and not all of them are finance people. So I've been doing a lot of either audio podcasts of the financials where someone will, obviously you're doing it, even though it sounds like two other people presenting it. But that sort of narrative that they're able to listen to something and then go to the board meeting. I've had so many non financial trustees say, it was so valuable and so helpful. And they felt more confident going into the board meeting and then being able to ask questions about the finances because it was delivered to them in a way that they were able to better understand it than if they had just gotten your standard board report package and were expected to formulate their own questions based on the numbers that were in front of them.
I think I'm going to steal that idea from you. I think that's brilliant. And I hope other people listening take advantage of that. I want to talk about one of the things that you know to be true and that I've certainly known to be true after doing this role for so many years is business officers getting into the fabric of their school, really understanding the students, the faculty, of course, the mission, but really becoming an active member of a community. And I recall that you taught a financial literacy class on campus. And like a lot of what you do, you put your heart and soul into it. And I remember you saying, this is so much work. I've never spent so much time on something. But what a great way for business officers to get involved in the actual delivery of program at their school. What inspired you to teach a class like that? And what did you learn from it?
I love having the connection to the students. I think I always joke that I could do finance anywhere, but to do it in a mission-based environment and in particular with young people, it's an incredible gift. And I coached for 13 years here, so I'm always up for a new challenge. Our upper school principal, kids have been clamoring. They really wanted some sort of financial literacy course, and I think it's really important for young people to have it. So I said, all right, I'll clearly have no training as a teacher, although I feel like I'm not a classroom teacher, although I've been a mentor and a teacher for many years. I, as you said, jumped in, and it is an enormous amount of work. My children went to Friends Academy, so I have a great love and enormous respect for the teachers here and the coaches and everyone that works hard every day. But I don't think that I fully appreciated how hard it is to teach in the amount of prep. So we have long blocks here to accommodate project-based learning. So you teach for about an hour and 20 minutes, which is a very long time. And so to prep to make sure that you have the right lesson for that day, for that amount of time, is at least I was prepping 3 hours a night to teach an hour and 20-minute class.
Wow.
So I understand it gets easier over time as you do it more. That was the biggest shock to me is that, yes, they go into the classroom and teach, but the amount of work that goes in before and then after, right? If you want to give your students really thoughtful feedback, right? That takes time. You have to individually see where they are at and what feedback is going to help them where they are, not like where the class is, help them be better. So I think if you're really trying to do it on a personal and differential level, which is I think what we strive for in independent schools, that it is time, it takes a lot of time and energy to do it well.
Where are students at based on that experience? I know it's a small focus group, but where are today's students at with financial literacy? Were there any future CFOs in your group?
There definitely were, and one of the I would tell you one of the nice things about when you do this kind of work is I often go when we do a senior panel at the end of the year, and they talk to a lot of the incoming families. So I just usually just go to hear the kids talk, and I'm sitting in the back room, and all of a sudden people start looking at me, and I was like, "Okay, what's going on?" But there had been other faculty members who saw them rehearse, and so they're like, "Pay attention, Amory." I got a giant shout out from one of the students who said that taking the class really made him really think about wanting finance as a career, and then he did a point out to me in the back of the room, which, of course, then at this point, I'm crying. So that's the beauty of the sort of relationships that you form in an independent school. The financial literacy is really important for young people, and I don't think that even families who may have finance parents I'm not sure that's really translating down to at the kid level. The 2 big things I think that most of the students were, I would say, the most surprised about was net take-home pay, that you don't actually take home. Here's all taxes, and then once they realized how much of their pay went to taxes, then they were really interested in how it got spent. And then we did a lot of just the really importance of your general savings, but then savings for retirement. And what's the difference if you start saving for retirement at 20 versus 30? And
Huge.
how is that different than stock picking? A lot of them were really interested in at the time, certainly crypto was big and they were really interested in everything crypto. But is that's not the long-term retirement strategy. No one I'm saying you can certainly play and it's a great way to learn about the stock market and understand it, but that's different than long-term financial planning.
For sure. It sounds like you did a great job. I can't imagine you sitting in the back of the room and they start talking about the impact you had. Really rewarding. And I love what you said about that's why so many of us choose to work in pre-K through 12 education, right? Because you get to have those moments and those connections. We're running short on time. This is going to be our last question. I want you to think about to the early part of your career at Friends Academy. And if you could go back and give yourself some really good advice early in your career, what would you have told young Anne Marie who doesn't know that she's going to be at that school in that role for 28 years?
Oh, what a great question. I would say that as much as you want to give back and you want to be part of it, you also need to set, I would say, reasonable boundaries for yourself because you can get swallowed up in the work. And don't be afraid to ask for what you need. And then I would think just patience, grace, a sense of humor, being part of the NBOA community. Because I think being an independent school business officer, sometimes you might feel like you're on this little island by yourself. And certainly earlier on in my career, I did. But to have an organization like MBOA where you have so much camaraderie, there's always an expert on something, and there's always someone who's willing to share their experience and their knowledge with you. And so I have been a great beneficiary of that over the course of my career. And I have done my very best to try and make sure that I give back in the same way that I receive. And I'm a big believer learning is a two-way street. Every time you teach somebody something, you're in fact learning something as well.
That's a great place to conclude. This has been such a great conversation, Anne-Marie, from data and strategic projects to financial literacy, and really about getting engaged in your association. I really think your career is a great example of how the independent school business officer role continues to evolve and how much influence this role can have on mission, strategy, and the student experience. So thank you so much for joining us today. And thanks to everyone listening. We hope today's conversation offered ideas, inspiration, and maybe even a few practical takeaways for your own work. I know I got some. I'm Jeff Shields for the Net Assets Podcast. Please consider subscribing to the Net Assets Podcast so you don't miss a future episode. Thank you again to Fax for supporting this episode of the Net Assets Podcast. Technology with heart, powered by data. And until next time.